So we have that article. How'd you guys feel about that article that we read?
Not really good about it.
What did you say? Not really good about it? Yeah, it was a little kind of highfalutin, a little too scientific. Yeah, if you're not a science guy, this unit can be a little bit of a drag. But you know, all you gotta do is find the answers to the questions, and those hopefully are simple enough, even if you're not into science. So number one, why have certain fossil men been declared to be ape-like and thus ancestral to modern man? Andrew?
I can't really say the word, but it's atomic not atomic. Anatomical similarities.
Yeah, so the stated reason by the article actually is talking more about the motive of the scientists rather than the motive of the evidence. And are you all right there, Amy? You are.
I got it way wrong.
Well, that might not be the answer. The best answer that I'm looking for comes from the first page, or the first paragraph, lines 4 through 5. And the answer is basically in an effort to fill the gap between apes and men. So, yeah, see, so don't be that quick to erase. Basically, I drew some pictures up here. I'm pretty proud of them. They turned out all right. But have you guys seen this sequence of pictures before?
Yeah.
You know, so this is the supposed evolution between some ape-like ancestor going through a number of transitional forms over millions of years before arriving at modern man. The problem is there are absolutely 0 fossils of these 3 forms. We have ape-like fossils, and we have ape fossils, and we have man fossils. We do not have any ape-like fossils. So certain fossil men, emphasis on men, these are humans, have been declared to be ape-like simply because they want to fill in the gap. You know, there is a lot of motivation. We'll talk about that motivation today, but there's a lot of motivation in the evolutionist community to find something that proves that picture, that sequence of pictures is real. And so in the absence of actual evidence, it is very tempting to fabricate evidence. And historically, that's what we've seen. But yes, if there's also a line in the article that says, evolutionists / paleoanthropologists are convinced that anatomical similarities between apes and men prove an evolutionary relationship. And then the author says his whole thesis is that this is all an effort to make a monkey out of man. And it's clever, but that's not exactly what's happening. But anyway, the article discusses 2 supposedly ape-like ancestors, Cro-Magnon man and Neanderthal man. When these fossils were discovered, they were believed to be what we call a missing link. That is, something in this transitional period that links apes to humans, hence the missing link. But how are the fossils of Cro-Magnon man and Neanderthal man classified today? That's number 2. Somebody else who did the assignment. Isaac, how are the fossils of Cro-Magnon man and Neanderthal man classified today? What'd you get for number 2? Homo sapiens, that is correct. So we'll get to the tree of life a little bit later. But if you remember that tree of life that I drew on the board, that's not a good place to start. Let's start over. Living creatures are classified according to something called taxonomy. And that is a fancy word that basically means this is where it fits on the chart. and taxonomy, you might have heard, has a kingdom, and then under the kingdom you have a phylum, and then under the phylum you have an order.
Oh, I remember learning about this.
Nope, it's not. It's class. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And every living thing has all of these things filled out. So, for example, humans are the kingdom Animalia. That means we're animals. Phylum Chordata, that means we have spinal cords, or vertebrate is another way to think of it. So we're animals, we're vertebrates. Class is Mammalia, which means that we produce milk to feed our young. Well, some of us do, the ladies. Class is Mammalia. Order, I forget order and family for Homo sapiens. But in any case, the last two, the genus is called Homo, meaning same. So everything in the Homo genus is the same as we are, and then the species is sapiens, which means intelligence, something like intelligence. And so oftentimes the scientific name for a creature is simply the genus and the species. So in this case, humans are Homo and sapiens. And that's where Homo sapiens comes from. Some scientists like to split hairs. There is a lot of people call it, there's a category called a subspecies, and humans then are also of the subspecies sapiens. Homo sapiens sapiens is like what some people refer to humans as. I think that might have been in the article where they say sapiens twice, but in any case, all of this stuff is basically every kind of human that is not Homo sapiens is a theoretical entity. They don't actually exist. All living humans now are Homo sapiens, and anything in the past that is not like a living human is something of a completely different genus. So the family is probably like primates or something. You guys distracted by the bag of chips?
No.
All right. Anyway, that was a bigger explanation than I needed. Number 3. When Neanderthal man was originally discovered, how did anatomist Professor Schaffhausen classify him? Ivy? Human, that's right. So Neanderthal man was discovered before Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. And we'll talk about why that's important in a minute. But before Origin of Species was published, an anatomist, that is an expert in looking at human bodies and bones, examined the Neanderthal man fossil and said, this is a man. But after Darwin published On the Origin of Species in the year 1859, a geologist, this is a guy who studies rocks, so like he doesn't really have much business studying fossils, but hey, he's a geologist, William King. How did he reclassify Neanderthal man? Ape, very good, yeah, it should be obvious from the way the question's phrased. If one is human, the other one is ape. So yeah, and the author of the paper comments that I guess geologists are better qualified than anatomists to study bones. So it was obviously a bit tongue-in-cheek there. Neanderthals have actually been found in a lot of places in the world. The first ones were found in the Neander Valley, which I think is in France, and that's where the name Neanderthal comes from. But they've also been found in other countries. Name 3 countries in which Neanderthal specimens have been found. We're on to Isaac.
China, I didn't get number 2. Number 3 is Greek.
3 is Greece? Yeah, there's a whole list of them. Yeah, Greek is the language that they speak in the country of Greece. So Greece is the country. I already said Greek. But there's a whole slew of them in the article. So you could put Germany, Belgium, China, Central and North America, or Central and North Africa, Iraq, Czechoslovakia, if you're really into writing needlessly long words. You put Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Greece, Northwestern Europe, and the Middle East. Some of those aren't countries, but this isn't a geology class, or this isn't a geography class. So if you think that Northwestern Europe is a country, I'll let your social studies teacher dock you points for that. It is in the article. Number 6, this is for Ivy. Is there a known relationship in humans between brain size and intelligence?
No.
There is not. That's right. So when paleontologists want there to be transitional fossils, a lot of times they'll say, well, this transitional skull is too small for a modern human brain, so we know that he was the modern equivalent of a moron. And the reality is, no, we don't, because there is no correlation between brain size and intelligence among humans. Number 7, back to Andrew, and that in 1957, Anatomists William Strauss and A.J. Cave examined a French Neanderthal who had previously been declared monkey-like. From what disease did they actually determine the fossil to be suffering?
Severe arthritis.
Very good. Arthritis. So arthritis is a disease of the bones, and you can imagine then it would affect the way your bones look when they are preserved as a fossil. And so, yeah, that particular Neanderthal specimen was actually just suffering from arthritis and was not a magical ape creature. Number 8, name one thing, this is for Isaac, name one thing that Neanderthal man is known to have done that evidences he is fully human.
I don't know.
You can name even one? Look on paragraph 9. There's a whole slew of them. Yeah, paragraph 9 on, it might not be in the front page of the article. I just have it listed as paragraph 9. I didn't reprint the article for myself. Buried the dead, sure. Neanderthals have been found to have buried their dead. That is, when we dig up their fossils, we can tell that they were respected. They weren't just left to die in a field. Buried their dead, they had elaborate funeral customs that included arranging the body and covering it with flowers. They made a variety of stone tools. That's another thing that's completely different than death. They worked with skins and leather. They engaged in medical care. They cared for and nurtured others. They showed human compassion. All of these things are evidenced in the fossils and artifacts that are found in Neanderthal societies. And there are no animals in the world that do that. Only humans have ever been known to do that. So even if you're not, if we say that maybe the fossils are a mixed bag, we'll concede that maybe the fossils aren't necessarily decisive. Well, we have all of these other evidences besides the skeletons that indicate that Neanderthal man was in fact human. Number 9, this is for Ivy. According to Eric Trinkhaus, one of the world's foremost authorities on Neanderthal man, is there anything about Neanderthal skeletal remains that conclusively indicates locomotor, manipulative, intellectual, or linguistic abilities inferior to modern humans? No, there is not. And you don't have to know the definition of those words to answer the question. You just have to find them and then figure out the answer. But if you're curious, locomotor refers to how you move, like your big movements, walking and stuff. Manipulative refers to how you handle things with your hands. Intellectual refers to how you think. And linguistic refers to how you speak. So in all of those ways, there is no evidence in the fossil record. According to one of the world's foremost authorities on Neanderthal man, there's no evidence that he was anything less than a modern human in any of those categories. Number 10, back to Andrew. What heresy, I put that in quotes, what heresy about paleoanthropology, that is the study of ancient humans, what heresy about what paleoanthropology reveals did Dr. David Pilbeam publish in American Scientist 66379?
Paleoanthropology reveals more about how humans feel about themselves than about how humans came about.
Very good. Reveals more about the way we see ourselves rather than the way we see ancient humans, which is what we are trying to study. But in reality, what we're really trying to do is fill in these gaps here that remain gaps because they're unfillable, because they don't exist and never did exist. So, very good. All right, I'll come around, collect your homework papers. Riker, you were absent, so you get an extra week. I guess you get an extra 2 weeks because we don't have class next Wednesday.
I was absent and I
was in the cities.
I don't care.
Yep, Ivy, you're just an eager beaver. You turned it in early. Good job. All right, today we're going to talk more about evolution. Evolution, as Ken Ham says with his beautiful Australian accent. Evolution. And, oops, there it goes. So last week we talked about how Darwin came up with the idea of evolution. Does anybody remember what animal he studied that kind of inspired him to have this idea?
Oh yeah.
Type of bird, yeah?
Finch.
Finches, yes. So he went on a trip to the Galapagos Islands, and there he found that the different islands had different environments. They were little biomes, you might say, if you're like a Minecraft player. These different islands had different biomes, and interestingly, he found that there were different kinds of finches living in these different biomes, and each kind of finch was adapted to live in that biome. So if there was one island with lots of nut trees growing, then the finches on that island tended to have big, thick beaks that could crack nuts open. And if another island had a lot of bugs living in the trees, the finches there had long, skinny beaks that could poke into a hole in a tree and grab a bug and yank it out and munch it down. And there were probably beaks that were adapted to eating fruit. I think Andy had that idea last week. I don't remember all of them, but there were. The point is that every island had a different adaptation of finch. But Darwin was pretty convinced, and he was probably right, that all of these finches were descended from a single ancestral pair of finches, or ancestral population. He didn't know if it was a single pair. But what appears likely to have happened was that sometime in the past there was a big storm that blew a small population of finches away from the mainland, and they happened to find these islands that were really isolated from the mainland. And not being able to get back to the mainland because it's a long ways off and they're not sure where it is, they just settled down and lived on these islands. And over time, the ones that had thicker beaks better survived on the islands that had big, thick nuts, whereas the ones that had skinny beaks better survived on the islands with bugs living in crevices and stuff like that. In other words, let's see here. If I draw some pictures, here's one with the thick beak. Here's one with the, here's one with the skinny beak. Here's one, I don't even know what kind of beak this has. I'm sure a hook beak is useful for something. So these are all finches that Darwin observed on different islands. And he supposes, and I'm not saying he's wrong, that they all descended from a single population of finches that had, we'll put a question mark there for what kind of beak they might have had. And what he discovered here is called natural selection. And this isn't the best way to illustrate natural selection. I wonder what is. This is a little complicated. We'll keep this on the board, huh?
Like a bird eating a bug and the other one not being able to get the bug and die.
Well, yeah. So here's something that we can let's forget about the ancestors. So natural selection actually says that the original population of finches had all of these. All of these already existed in the original population, or at the very least, they were present in the genes, right? So your genes are the DNA that's in your body that codes the person you are, but you can have what are called recessive genes that are still in your body and in the code, but they're not expressed. A commonly exampled reference that a recessive gene is blonde hair. In order for a person to have blonde hair, they have to have a blonde hair gene from their mom and a blonde hair gene from their dad. But if you have a blonde hair gene from your mom and a brown hair gene from your dad, you're going to have brown hair. That's how the example goes. Because the brown hair gene is dominant.
If you have a kid with another person with a recessive gene, then couldn't the child be blonde?
Exactly, yes. So two people with brown hair might both be carrying the recessive blonde gene, and so two people with brown hair might get together and have a baby that has blonde hair, and that is a thing that could happen. So for example, and this is purely example, if the skinny beak is recessive, the original population of finches might not have had any skinny beaks, but the skinny beak genes were still there and could have been expressed in future generations. But the idea of natural selection says that that in a population with a lot of variation, a lot of variety, if the environment changes, then some of them will be favored and others of them will die. So in this case, where, you know, the entire population goes to an island that is full of nuts, and wouldn't you know it, but these guys survive, and the other two don't make it. And then over here, if we got an island with a bunch of bugs, then this guy survives, and the other two to his left and right, they don't make it. And you can imagine where this is going. I'm going to pretend like this is a beak that's suitable for eating pineapple, I guess. And and so on this island, then you've got the pineapple beak does well, and the other two guys die. So along comes Darwin, and he observes this. Right? So that's Darwin's eyeball here, and he observes this point in time right here. So he finds one island that's got all these birds, and another island that's got all these birds, another island that's got all these birds. And so he probably rightly concludes that all of these birds, even though they're separate appearances, they're all finches, and they all probably descended from the same population where all of these beaks were present. But because of the unique environments on each of the different islands, only some of them survived. This is called natural selection. And natural selection is okay. This is not what we oppose in the church. So to make this a little more clear in the diagram, these would be the original population there, and then these would be current population. I'm just going to abbreviate that POP. And what changed is right here, these are environmental changes. Another example, suppose you have a pack of wolves. This is purely theoretical, although I'm sure it's happened. Suppose you have a pack of wolves, and within this pack of wolves, you have lots of different kinds of hair color. You know, they're not all identical. You have some that are gray, some that are brown, some that are light, some that are dark. And then this pack of wolves, their territory, I don't know, they have a few really hard winters where there's a ton of snow and it lasts a long time. It comes early, it stays late, and you end up having like 9 months of the year the ground is covered with snow. During that time then, these wolves are hungry, they're hunting, and some of them are going to be spotted by the prey a mile away because they have dark fur against the white snow. But other wolves will be able to sneak much closer to their prey and thus much more likely to get it and eat it and survive. And those ones, of course, will have the lighter colored fur. And so what ends up happening is the darker colored wolves, they end up dying out before they can reproduce. And so the genes for dark colored hair fall out of favor in this population, whereas the genes for the light colored hair or fur, the genes for light colored fur, they get passed down to future offspring because the parents survive. And that's how natural selection works. So you have a wide range of fur colors, and then something changes in the environment, and suddenly one kind of fur color is preferred to another. And so that kind gets passed down to future generations, and within a relatively short time, the entire population of that wolf pack is going to be light-haired because all the dark-haired ones died off. The genes for dark hair might still exist in that population, and so if the environment were to revert back, or if the wolf pack moved south or something like that, then the dark hair might be restored to the population because it's still, the information, if you will, is still present in the genes. That's how natural selection works, and it's cool, it's fine. What Darwin did that we don't like is that he decided to take it further. He saw the present, and he made an inference about the past, and then he thought, well, you know, what if these are actually just evolved, you know, so he called this evolving, where nature selects a population for an environment. He says, well, if these evolved from these, what did these evolve from? You know, then there must be some other kind of bird that is the ancestor to these finches and also to some other kind of bird. And then that ancestor must itself be descended from some other ancestor that's further up the chart that is descended from more birds. And maybe eventually there's some ancestor way up there that is the ancestor of all modern birds, and also the ancestor of some other creatures that are kind of like birds, like, I don't know, reptiles, who have scales that kind of look like feathers and have hollow bones, just like birds have. So maybe birds and reptiles have a common ancestor. And if you go even further back, reptiles and amphibians maybe have a common ancestor that was amphibious, and so you just kind of work your way up. So what I drew last week, was the tree of life, where suppose each one of these lines represents a modern species of animal. And of course, this is horribly simplified because there are millions of species. And it's not just animals, it's plants and fungi and bacteria and stuff like that too. But bear with me. The tree of life says that these descended from common ancestors. And you don't always know exactly how it was. So maybe there's 4 with a single common ancestor. And then these common ancestors likewise descended from a common ancestor. And maybe these ones didn't have any mixing with these right away, but eventually they did up here. And ultimately, you can kind of see where this is going. You have an ultimate common ancestor way up here that is the origin of all life. And that was Darwin's that's why he called it the origin of species. So he made this observation about species being naturally selected, and he just took it to the absolute extreme and said, what if all species are descended from an origin, a single creature that was the beginning of all life? And that was Darwin's big thing. Problem with this is that evolution by natural selection, that is the stuff that we can actually observe, is fairly slow. No, there's a bigger problem than that before we even get into slow. The bigger problem is that evolution by natural selection only works by removing things from an original population. Here we have a population with a lot of variety, and then the environment changes, and now we have separate populations with less variety. So if you can think of the different beaks as information is lost going from this to this. We lost 2 things, and we didn't actually gain anything. We only preserved this one, and the same can be said there. So natural selection only works when nature is able to select one winner from a large collection of, I guess you would call them, losers. And so that's a problem with Darwin's theory, is where does the new genetic information come from? And scientists, I think Darwin himself proposed this, but I'm getting my names mixed up maybe. But it was proposed that the way that new information comes about is mutations. Yes. So sometimes when 2 parents make a child, whether it's human or other species, in the process of reproduction, some gene gets messed up. Maybe it gets duplicated, maybe some letters in the DNA code get mixed up or swapped around, or there's any number of mechanisms of mutation. But basically, the mutations are totally random, and most of the time they kill the offspring. The result of mutations is either nothing happens because they're recessive, and so it just gets passed along in the gene pool, or it does do something, and the something is destructive because living creatures are incredibly complex. And if you just go in there, if any of you have done anything with computer programming, if you have code that works and you go in there and just start messing things up, the code's going to break. You're going to break your program. Or if you have a complicated machine with a lot of gears and shafts and stuff, if you just go in there and start, picking out gears and swapping out their sizes and stuff, you're almost certainly going to break the machine. And that's usually what happens with mutations. But theoretically, there might be a mutation in the genes that actually helps the population. And so if we can imagine that happening, then that would be a way that we could introduce something new to the gene pool that actually sticks around because, like, it's helpful, it's good.
But isn't that like very unlikely?
Yes, that is extremely unlikely. In fact, it has never actually been observed. But it's theoretically possible, and when things are theoretically possible, we can do math with them. We can do statistics. And so we can imagine, statistically speaking, that maybe once every million years, a mutation might come along that is beneficial to the population. And so we figure, I'm just throwing out a million years, but every million years, it's probably more than that. Every million or so years, one of these splits in the tree of life can happen. And that means, if you want to believe in this, which Darwin and atheistic scientists very much do want to believe in this, if you want to believe in this, then you absolutely must have a world that is millions, if not billions, of years old. Because there is absolutely no way to believe that this happened by chance unless you have huge time scales. So last time, or 2 times ago now, 2 Wednesdays ago, we talked about how there is so much evidence that our Earth is young, and there's very, very little contestable evidence that it is old. And one of you asked me, well, why do scientists insist on going after the old evidence when there's such a preponderance of young Earth evidence? This is why. Because Charles Darwin is heralded as like a great prophet of the modern scientific movement because he found a way for life to exist without God. Before that, it was ludicrous to think that life could possibly have started with anything other than God. But Darwin devised a way for life to exist without God, and this way demands that life be millions and millions and hundreds of millions of years old. And so we must have, that's the assumption that we have to start with, that the Earth is that old, because there's no way that it couldn't be. Yes, and
also, isn't it like super unlikely that like life just started on its own?
Yes, that is impossible to predict statistically. That is called abiogenesis and is another big problem with the theory of evolution. Abiogenesis. If you break it down, you have the A meaning not, bio meaning life, and genesis meaning beginning. So, in other words, abiogenesis is where life begins from non-life. In all of the observed world, whenever you encounter something that is alive, you know that it was born of something else that was alive. We have never observed, even in a controlled laboratory setting where we're trying to build this stuff, we have never observed life rising from non-life. And we may come to a day when we can assemble a living cell in a laboratory.
Make a cell?
Nope.
That's what my science teacher said.
No, a living cell, that would be massive. A living cell has never been manufactured in a laboratory. I can take that one to the bank. And it could one day, theoretically, but even then, that would just be saying that, suppose you find a bicycle and you're trying to prove that the bicycle came around by chance. Well, being able to study that bicycle and then build another bicycle does not prove that the original bicycle came around by chance. So I'm not worried that we will someday discover how to build a cell in a laboratory, and that will undermine the creationist point of view, because all we're doing is taking something that God designed and imitating it. But I am also confident that hasn't happened yet. So your science teacher might have been thinking of something else, but yeah, no. No, cells are incredibly complicated things. A virus, maybe. Scientists would definitely need to be able to synthesize a virus before they could begin to approach something as complex as a cell. But yeah, who knows? Maybe your teacher was talking about a cloned cell or something like that. So the question for creation scientists is where, so we do believe that this sort of thing happens, and so we do believe that one species can become multiple species over time. But the main difference that we have with evolutionists as creation scientists is that we just kind of put a dotted line in, recent history and say, God made it here. And so after God made everything, then because he put so much variety and so much beauty in the creation of life, that it, made lots of species. I think we mentioned, we're going to talk about Noah's flood in a future class, really dive into it, but I do think I mentioned how on Noah's flood, there was probably only one dog species, or one dog kind. That's the word that the Bible uses to describe animals that can reproduce together. So there was probably one kind of dog, with the female as well. I'm being totally lazy and just drawing the female sign. But these guys came off the ark, and from them are descended wolves and coyotes and domestic dogs, and I don't know what else. Dingoes are things in Australia that are basically dogs. And so we Christians would be perfectly comfortable saying that all of these creatures are descended from a common ancestor. Indeed, if they're able to breed, which some of these can, if they can reproduce together, then that's proof that they have a common ancestor, according to the Bible. Because if you read Genesis 1 and 2, and also Genesis 6 through 9, which is the ark account, repeatedly God refers to animals reproducing after their kinds. So if two animals are able to reproduce, even if they're different species on our taxonomic hierarchy, this is all man-made. So, if two different species can reproduce, fine. They're probably descended from a single common ancestor, or, pair of ancestors that came off of Noah's Ark, because there's a lot of variety in the genetics that God produced that can make lots of different species if the environment calls for it. One of the reasons why Australia has such an odd mix of animals, the animals in Australia are really unique, is probably because there was a land bridge that allowed traffic to flow to Australia sometime after the flood, and then the land bridge disappeared. The sea levels rose or something like that, or glaciers retreated, and they were isolated. And so being isolated in a single unique environment, like the continent of Australia, did to the animals there what the Galapagos Islands did to these finches. So you get a lot of weird animals in a place like Australia because they're in such a different environment than the rest of the world, and they don't interact with other populations. But they're all descended still from the same pairs. Now, what if, for example, wolves and dingoes are not able to interbreed? Does that mean they definitely don't have a common ancestor?
No.
It doesn't, right? Because we believe in a world full of sin. Natural selection involves a lot of death. Each of these X's involves somebody dying. and there's a lot of death and decay and destruction in this world of sin. And so two divergent species might lose the ability to reproduce. That is something that is certainly possible. Or there could be an extinct branch as well. You can always add a branch to here that just goes extinct. Some other population that might exist in the fossil record, but doesn't exist today, and that's perfectly fine too. But a weird dog in the fossil record is not going to be a transitional form between dogs and some other ancestor that is not quite a dog. It's just going to be, I should be saying canines rather than dogs, because those are all canines. But you get the idea, I hope. So if it's not obvious, I should make it obvious for you. Although we'll talk about this more next time. That this story of how life came to be is extremely different from the account given in the Bible. Even if we don't talk about the age of the earth, let's pretend the Bible allows for billions of years or whatever. It doesn't, but let's pretend that it does. There is still something extremely wrong with this story that makes it incompatible with the Christian faith. Can anybody see what it is? what's wrong with evolution by natural selection that makes it incompatible with the Christian faith? Yeah.
Well, is it that God didn't create it and it just came about on its own?
Yeah, there's actually a ton of things that are wrong. That was maybe a bad question for me to ask. You're right, yeah. What I'm getting at is a more theological issue. When God made the world, he made it good, right? Everything was good. And in case it's not obvious from that alone, the Bible also says that death is the wages of sin. And of course, you have the account of the tree in the garden where Adam and Eve were told they would surely die if they ate from that tree, meaning that they would not surely die if they didn't eat from it. So everything in the Bible points to the fact that death is a result of sin, and that God, being good, did not create a world of sin. The whole problem that is solved by Jesus is that we humans introduce sin into the world, and so we humans need a savior to set us free from it. If God made a world full of sin, then that's God's problem. We're not guilty of anything. We're just living according to God's natural order. But that's not how it is. God's natural order does not include death. That's something that we brought into the world. Now, take it to here. The whole reason evolution by natural selection works is because some guys die and other guys live. And even if you throw mutations into the mix, a mutation that adds to a population is only going to do so because that population, or what I should say, a mutation that adds to the population, that changes the population, is only going to change the population because the ones with the mutation are more fit to survive, and the ones without the mutation are not as fit. Survival of the fittest. Evolution by natural selection requires so much death. Death at every step. Survival of the fittest means death of the unfittest. And so if God created humanity, if humans are just one branch on the old family tree here, here we are, if humans are just one branch on the family tree, then everything before us is death, all the way back up to the big source. And so if death was already in the world at the time that humans evolved, or at the time that God caused humans to evolve, or the time that God blessed this particular great ape with the image of God, or however you want to make it fit both evolution and the Bible, you have to admit that mankind was born into a world filled with death, so much death, and that completely undermines the entire Christian faith. So this is why the church in America is shrinking, I'm convinced anyway, is because we allow the theory of evolution to slip in the back door because it's science, and a lot of people that we trust said that it's proven, and so we're like, okay, well, we can work with this, and the reality is we can't. The evolution of man requires that death exists before man, which means that man's not responsible for sin, which means that man doesn't need a savior. God made sin, so God's the one who got to fix it, So yeah, the theory of evolution completely undermines the Christian faith, and that is what we're going to look at more next time. Was there anything else I wanted to say about it? I didn't go over much evidence against the theory of evolution. I kind of kept it more... We've talked about how the transitional fossils don't exist. This is not a missing link only for humans and apes. This is a missing link for everything. I've read articles, it's been a few years, but I've read articles about the so-called evolution of horses and how there are no equine transitional forms from, ancient horses that are in the fossil record and are probably just extinct horses, and, but they put them way back in the past, but then there's no transition from the ancient horse to the modern horse. It's missing, and I'm sure the same is true of canines and any other species that is studied. It has missing links in its fossil record, and it shouldn't, because every branch on this tree existed for millions of years, and so there should be a smooth, gradual transition in the fossil record from the ancient ancestors to modern forms, and there is not, does not exist. Andy?
I dogs, wolves that got domesticated, or are they their own thing?
Yeah, they're domesticated wolves. That's basically what that's saying.
Oh, because like
Yes.
when they got domesticated, they unwolf.
They unwolfed? Yeah, well, what I'm saying by this image here is just that wolves and domesticated dogs have a common ancestor. And I did not do anything fancy with this. There's probably a little more intersection that ought to be happening at different times or whatever. But that's what I'm saying, is that domestic dogs are descended from the same creature that modern wolves are descended from. This is an important distinction. A lot of critics of evolution will say that, evolutionists say that we evolved from monkeys. And that's not technically true.
They were,
What's that?
weren't they just like monkey, like we're both the same?
Where's my black marker? Evolutionists would say that, suppose this guy is a monkey, no, that's not right either. Evolutionists would say that this guy has a whole nother road coming from him that leads to a modern monkey, which I guess looks something like this. I don't know. Ooh, ah. So that looks like a modern monkey. Yeah. It's a Curious George, sure. So what an evolutionist would say was we did not evolve from monkeys, but rather we and modern monkeys both evolved from the same ape-like ancestor. That is technically what they would say. And so also here, I'm not saying or disagreeing that domestic dogs are descended from wolves. I guess what I should say is I'm not saying that domestic dogs are descended from wolves. I'm saying that both modern domestic dogs and modern wolves are descended from a common ancestor. And whether that particular ancestor is also the ancestor of coyotes and dingoes, or whether you gotta go further back to find that one, I don't know. But I would bet that there was a single mated pair of canines on Noah's Ark that is the ancestors of all modern canines. I think canine is the family that all of those creatures fall under. And that is what the scientists at the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter, that's what they say too, is that this is man-made, so it's not going to be precise every time, but generally speaking, the biblical kind by which two creatures can reproduce is probably around the level of family in the hierarchy. So, God did not send 8,000 breeds of dog to live on Noah's Ark. He probably sent a single mated pair of canines in that family, and then all of the genus and species under the canine family are descended from that pair of dogs, pair of canines. Last thing, racism. Gotta talk about racism, because that's in your homework a lot. So another really bad thing that came from Darwin's theory of evolution is the idea that I think I mentioned this before in this class, different races of humans evolved from different ape-like ancestors.
Wouldn't that make them different species then?
It would, yes, yeah. So nowadays, we're going to be tackling this issue in your homework tonight, but nowadays there are people who think it's wrong to have interracial relationships, like a black person and a white person should not interbreed, should not intermarry, they're too far apart. Christian people think that. And that's very, very wrong. That goes against the teaching of the Bible that we're all descended from the same man Noah, and before him Adam, so we're all the one human race. But that idea was popularized with the theory of evolution, because one of Darwin's earliest hypotheses was that, white Europeans were descended from intelligent chimpanzees, and the black Africans were descended from the brutish gorillas, so they're big and dumb and strong, and just all these terrible stereotypes. And you'll read about how Australian Aborigines and African pygmies were treated as transitional creatures, as living fossils, you might say, and were treated as animals. Because they looked so different from, white European people, they were treated as subhuman. And yeah, there is a really terrible legacy of racism that was born from the theory of evolution that thankfully, modern science has been able to prove, without the Bible, that we are all descended from the same woman, mitochondrial Eve, she's called, and there's also a Y chromosomal Adam that is the ancestor of all men. So it's very obvious now that we're all one human race, but it was not obvious at the outset, and that legacy is still alive and active today. So that's what we'll be looking at in our homework. It's a longer homework assignment, so it's a good thing you got 2 weeks to work on it, because we don't have class next week because of Thanksgiving Eve. So come to worship, and that's that. I think that's all I got for you. We'll close out in prayer out there. I do have graded papers for you. Here is your homework. There's 2 memory verses. They're short, but this is basically a double-wide assignment. So there you go. Yep.